Hello everyone. In the Will It Run video I did about this 1966 Ford Mustang, after I started the engine I discovered the gauge cluster had some problems. The fuel level gauge, temperature gauge, and ammeter weren't functioning properly. The fuel gauge is reading like almost completely empty. In my last video I showed how I used dummy loads to troubleshoot the problem with the temperature gauge. This time I'm using those same dummy loads to troubleshoot the fuel gauge. That fuel gauge has not really moved or barely moved. There might be a problem with that. There's only a small amount of gas in the tank according to the gauge, like less than 1/8 of the tank. So I'm going to put 5 gallons of fresh fuel in it. See if that helps. That didn't move the gauge or get the fuel flowing. Sweet. I really haven't seen the fuel tank, fuel gauge move. Not even after I added 5 gallons to the 16-gallon tank and drove the car around a little. So let's do some troubleshooting. So this gives the appearance that someone was working on the gauge, the fuel gauge, because they added an extra ground wire to the fuel sender. So here's the wire from the gauge. I'm going to add a 10 ohm resistor to this to ground to see where the gauge goes. So the temperature gauge, oil pressure gauge, and fuel level gauge circuits all work the same way. They use a variable resistance to measure the level they're monitoring. There's this little voltage regulator on the back of the instrument cluster that provides 6 volts to the gauge circuits. The circuits are all similar to the temperature circuit that I covered in the previous video, but instead of a temperature sensor, in this case there's a fuel level sensor. The fuel level sensor is a variable resistance that changes its value depending on the position of the float arm. As the float raises in the tank, the resistance varies from 73 ohms at empty to 10 ohms when the tank is full. You might want to watch my temperature gauge video to help you understand how and why I made my dummy loads. I'm using 3 of them. With the 73 ohm dummy load, the fuel gauge should be close to the empty mark. The 25 ohm dummy load should put it close to the middle of the gauge range. And the 10 ohm dummy load should place the fuel gauge needle on full. This is how my dummy loads are wired because I made them out of random resistors I already had. But if you get one of the new resistor kits, you can make yours like this. Okay, there's my 10 ohm dummy load. Okay, now let's go see what the gauge is doing. There it is, it went all the way up to full. Okay, I'm going to let it settle back down to empty again. Now that the key switch is turned off. Okay, the gauge is reading below empty. Turn that key switch on. And it goes right up to full. It's right on the full marker with the 10 ohm resistor. That tells me this gauge circuit is working perfectly. So if there's a problem, it's either with the sending unit ground or the sending unit itself. Or possibly the chassis ground to the battery. Now let's go change the resistor. Okay, I'm going to remove the 10 ohm dummy load. See that? 10 ohms. And insert my 25 ohm dummy load. Right there, 25 ohms. And by the way, the fact that the 10 ohm resistor works so well, and I had it grounded right here to the same place that this wire is grounded, tells me that the sending unit has a good ground. I'm connected to the same place the sending unit is. Okay, let's go look at the fuel gauge level again. Alright, put this on accessories. We'll see where that gauge goes. Look at that, 25 ohms is almost half a tank. Just as I expected. That's pretty good. Now let's go put the 73 ohm dummy load in and see what that does. Okay, I connected that 73 ohm dummy load that I made. Let's go see what that looks like. With the power off, the gauge is reading below the empty mark all the way down to the E. Accessories on, and this should come up to the low mark. And there it is. It came up to the low mark, just a little bit low of it, but that's what we want to see. When the sending unit says the tank is out of gas, it's out of gas. So there's a problem with the sending unit or the ground to the sending unit. Let's take a look at that ground sum. This really seems like it should be a good ground. Well, let's take this off of here. It's held on by a hose clamp onto the metal tube, the steel tube coming out of the sending unit. And you know, that looks pretty darn dirty. It may have been tinned at one time, I don't know. Okay, I'm going to snip this off and strip it back a little and have a clean piece of copper to clamp on there. I'm also going to run a little emery cloth on here to make sure that's a clean ground, a good connection. I love these red wires they use for grounds. Yeah, it's pretty clean looking copper there. I'll take it. plug this back in. This seems to be a good sound plug here. It's not loose or anything like that. I think I can trust it. All right. Now that's a good ground, I'm sure. Okay, let's see what happens now. Look at that, it only went up to the level it always only went up to. So redoing that ground didn't help, and the gauge is good, and the gauge circuit is good. So I'm going to have to assume there's a problem with the sending unit. So I'm going to go ahead and order a new one. Okay, my new fuel level sender has arrived. It's a Dorman brand. 692-156 fuel sending unit. That's what it looks like. So here's the float and the swing arm on the float. And as the fuel level increases in the tank, the float rises. And it turns this potentiometer in here, or variable resistor, whatever it is in there. And that changes the resistance output. So I'm going to do a couple little demonstrations here to show you what that looks like, or to kind of give you a visual anyway. So the first one is on this big gauge, which is set up to read ohms. It's on the 1 ohm scale. And let me just make sure it's zeroed out. This thing's a little touchy. Okay, right on 0 ohms there. So I'll connect the positive lead, the red, onto the terminal there, and the black onto the frame or the body of this thing, the ground. And with the float all the way down, we can see that it's reading, well, right there it looks like it's reading 100. But it should be, if I let it down nice and easy, and it's reading, it looks like 75 on this ohm meter here. And then as the fuel rises, you can see it's coming up, and at about halfway through its travel right there, it's reading around 20 ohms or a little more. And all the way to the top, seems to be reading about 12.5 ohms. That's with this really sketchy old meter, cheap old meter. That's probably not very accurate, but here's what it looks like again. I'll sweep it through its travel. Top, bottom. That's how the resistance changes as this rises and falls. It's right on 10 ohms there, I think. 9 or 10 ohms all the way when it's got pressure on it, all the way at the top. And then down to the bottom. And what's that say? Darn close to 75 ohms, or should be 73, but you're not going to read that on here. It's not accurate enough. Up, 10 ohms, empty, 73 ohms, or 75, whatever. It just gives you a rough estimate of what's in the tank. Okay, that's that. I used a click-clack pump to pump out as much of that ugly gas from the tank as possible. The front of the tank was jacked up to pull all the fuel in the tank toward the rear. These little pumps come in handy for a variety of uses when you're working on vehicles. Almost 5 gallons came out this way. After pumping almost 5 gallons out of the tank, the fuel gauge needle hasn't moved a bit. I don't know how tight this is. I should be able to get it with this wrench, we'll see. And even though I substantially drained the tank, I have this very big pan here that I'm going to try to catch whatever comes out here in. Yeah, that's really stuck. So this is the centerpiece on my distributor wrench. It's a cheap one, but this looks like it's 3/8, and it is. So that can be helpful. Oh boy. So an adapter 3/8 drive to 1/2 inch. And a nice long 1/2 inch drive breaker bar. Gotta be careful there. I felt the tank give a little bit here. Actually bent the tank. Now that that's broken loose, I probably don't need that much force. Maybe it's not that loose. Okay. It's getting ready to come. Yeah, it smells like old gas. I'm actually surprised the engine ran as well as it did on this old turpentine. I don't need the wind. I'm blocking the wind with my body a little bit. Keep that from blowing around so much. I want it to run down the side so it doesn't splash out as much. I got a total of 6 gallons out of the tank. Okay. Well, we'll just let that drain out till it's done. So that might be possibly about 1.5 gallons there. And it's still dripping. Guess what? That needle still goes to the same spot. It's stuck in that spot. Not the gauge, but the sensor. Even with a completely empty tank, it still goes to the same level it always has. I'll have to replace this little piece of hose anyway. Now I've got to work this retaining ring off. Turns counterclockwise to come off. It's got these little tabs here to bang on. This thing's spewing gasoline at me when I bang on it.
Maybe some penetrating lube will help?
Saw it move a little bit. Alright, here we go. Oh, look at that. There's no float on there. No wonder it's not moving. And boy, there's a lot of rust on this thing. It's rusty and crusty. I'll have to have a good look inside the tank. There's a little bit of crustiness. It really doesn't look that bad in here, in this area. There's the rubber seal, also in good shape. Of course, I'll replace it. Did I tell you how much this gasoline smells like turpentine? It's really bad. Old gas. So it's good to get that out. And I had added I added 5 and then 2.5 more gallons. So this has been nicely flushed at this point.
I definitely spoke too soon on that one. There's the float. It's difficult to get a good shot inside a dark tank. But there's a lot of crusty rust in there and the bottom is full of gravelly sludge. It's obvious this tank is beyond saving, so I'm replacing the tank. I tried to pull the float out of the bottom of the tank by looping around it. I actually had it trapped under my fingers at this point. But it got away.
Yeah, there's all sorts of crud on the bottom of that tank.
So I'm replacing it. But that's my next video. For now, I'm just going to confirm that the new fuel level sender is functioning properly. So I clip leaded it to the signal wire by the tank and to a good ground.
Okay, we're starting out at empty right there. The gauge is reading below empty. So the float is all the way down, the gauge is reading below empty. As the fuel rises in the tank, the float rises till it gets to the top. Now it's full. I don't know if the gauge responded as quickly as I just moved it. So I'll hold it here for a couple seconds. Alright, it's probably full now, we're above full. I'll go down here. That's somewhere around halfway. Maybe the gauge is reading around half a tank here. Or here. And then it'll drop all the way down until it gets to empty. Right there. I'm going to go look at the gauge. Let's see. I'm going to move it all the way to full and see what it looks like. Okay, the fuel level sender is all the way at full. And the tank, oh, this does take a few seconds to get up there, doesn't it? But it's hitting full. The float is all the way in the full position right now. Okay, let me go move it to about half tank. Okay, now I'm moving the float to about the half tank position. I'm going to just set it down here in that position. And see what that looks like on the gauge. Okay, I thought the float was at about the half tank position and the gauge is on half a tank. This is looking good. I'm going to move it down, see if I can set it to a quarter tank. Okay, now I'm going to move this float to where I think it might be a quarter tank. Just taking a guess.
The level sender response is not linear because the tank volume isn't linear. As the fuel level approaches the quarter tank level and below, the perimeter of the pool at the bottom of the tank becomes smaller in area. The bottom of the tank has a ramp area that decreases in perimeter as the level drops. Well, that was a pretty good guess. I thought that would be around a quarter tank. Looks like it's still moving a little. Yeah, it's below a quarter. But the gauge is working.
The new fuel level sender is working, so I know the problem will be fixed when I put the new sender in. Now it's still too difficult to get enough light in there to really get a good image and show you what's in there. But now that the tank's had a couple of days to dry out, listen to this. Well, you can hear the float in there too, but listen to that. Hear all that crud? It's full of crud in there. Loose crud. That's all rust flakes that flaked off the inside of the tank. And there's nothing I can do to treat it so it'll stop that. It's just going to continue. So that's why I'm replacing this tank. Even though structurally it's probably still sound, the interior surfaces are all rust and just gradually disintegrating, causing a mess inside the tank that will work its way up through the fuel lines and through the filter and maybe clog the fuel filters. So it's time for a new tank. Well, there was a problem with the shipment on my new tank, so I'm not going to be able to show you how to install a new level sensor, but I can walk you through how to install a level sensor on the old tank, and I'll just reinstall the new one in here. So the first thing is, the sensors come with a new rubber seal that fits in this groove right here like that. So when you're installing a new one, you'll have a new seal and put that in there. Just have to make sure it stays seated in there while you install the sensor. Then here's the sensor, and it just goes in this hole, but I was always wondering what these two tabs are. You see there's a tab here and here on the base of the sensor. There's actually two slots in here, two keyways you could say, that those fit in, and that's just to orient this properly, to index it properly, so it's not rotated out of position. So that just fits in there like that. It sits flat with those two tabs in their slots. Then the retaining ring goes under these. There's three locking tabs built onto the tank right here, here, and here. And this retaining ring is designed to fit under those tabs, and then you turn it, and there's actually a ramp on this. So let me show you more closely. There's the ring. These are the four tabs that you hammer on to rotate it. Let me see if I can hold this up properly here, if it'll focus. And this ramp here, this goes under those tabs on the tank. You see it's slightly curved upward, so that as you rotate it, it kind of cams in and gets tighter and tighter as you bang it around. So that goes here with the seal in place, of course. I'm not putting it in there for this. And then get this retainer in there, and it rotates to lock under these three tabs. So let me get that. So that's, in this case, it's very rusty and very rough, so this isn't going to go too smoothly, but a new one will be smoother. You go ahead and rotate that around like this, making sure that all those corners get under these three locking tabs, and then just hammer it around until it's nice and tight like that. This can go a little farther, but see that it's already tight, and that'll compress that seal between the base of the sender and the flange of the tank. So that's all there is to installing the sensor.
Thank you for watching. Please take a moment to like and subscribe.